Chapter 117. The Imperial Mausoleum was the place where the emperors of the Empire of Tang were buried. It was majestic and had experienced the vicissitudes of life since the establishment of the Empire of Tang. System, sign in. Su Qin thought for a moment and said in his heart, although the Emperor of Tang's mausoleum only had a history of 500 to 600 years, with his status in the Empire of Tang, he should have gathered some Dao accumulations. Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. You have received True Dragon Aura. A mechanical and cold voice sounded in Su Qin's ears. True Dragon Aura? Su Qin was slightly taken aback. In the next moment, the magical use of True Dragon Aura surged in Su Qin's mind. So this is the True Dragon Aura? Su Qin raised his right hand and saw wisps of golden aura flowing between his fingers. These golden auras gathered and scattered, and the outline of a dragon was faintly revealed. The True Dragon Aura was a special kind of aura. It was nurtured in the body for a long time and had the effect of stabilizing and improving one's blood and qi. Even for venerable arhat and legend, the True Dragon Aura was a rare secret treasure. Perhaps in a short period of time, the True Dragon Aura wouldn't improve one's blood and qi by much, but over hundreds of years of accumulation, it would definitely produce a qualitative change and completely improve one's blood and qi by a level. Not bad. Su Qin's expression was satisfied. At his level, the influence of external objects was getting lower and lower. The True Dragon Aura was one of the few treasures that could directly improve one's combat strength. Ordinary venerable arhat or legend could use the power of the True Dragon to nurture their body for 400 to 500 years and completely improve their blood and qi by a level. But Su Qin wasn't an ordinary venerable arhat. His shoyun was twice as long as the other venerable arhats, and it had been a full 1,000 years. Su Qin was looking forward to what would happen if his blood and qi were nurtured by the True Dragon Aura for 1,000 years. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. Over the past year, Su Qin finally signed into the entire palace. Similar to the Shaolin Temple, most of the places in the Imperial Palace didn't have much Dao accumulation. It was only enough to sign in once or several times. But Su Qin still found more than a dozen locations where he could repeatedly sign in. This had completely exceeded Su Qin's expectations. It should be noted that even an ancient temple like the Shaolin Temple, which had been operating for thousands of years, only the Sutras Depository, the Demon Subduing Tower, and the Bodhi Yard could be used by Su Qin repeatedly. But in the Imperial Palace, there were actually more than a dozen places that could be harvested multiple times. This made Su Qin extremely happy. And perhaps because Chang and city was the ancient capital of 10 dynasties, it had experienced more years of history than the Shaolin Temple. The things that Su Qin signed in the palace were generally of a higher level than the Shaolin Temple. For example, a treasure like the innate spirit liquid, which could increase the level of arhat without limit, was not something that could be obtained by signing in at the Shaolin Temple. Of course, this was not absolute, but overall. After all, Su Qin signed in at the Shaolin Temple, the strongest divine art, Buddha's palm, and so far, no other divine art was comparable to it. It's almost time to start breaking through and truly step into the fourth heavenly layer. Su Qin sat cross-legged, silently thinking in his heart. As early as in the Shaolin Temple, I was already at the peak of the third heavenly layer. In less than a year after coming to the Imperial Palace, I completed the fourth transformation of my body. Now after another year of adjustment, I'm afraid that I'm only half a step away from the fourth heavenly layer. It can even be said that I'm infinitely close. Su Qin's eyes lit up. Su Qin was a very cautious person, otherwise, he wouldn't have stayed in the Shaolin Temple for nearly 30 years. I can break through tonight. Su Qin made a decision in his heart. Next, Su Qin walked out of the right spring square and strolled slowly in the East Palace. Since the death of the Emperor of Tang a year ago, Crown Prince Li Sheng moved out of the East Palace not long after, inherited the throne, and moved into the Long Life Hall, the bedroom palace of the past the Emperor of Tang. As for his little sister Su Yuan, she was also conferred the title of Empress and lived in the Cunning Palace. During this period, many ministers objected. After all, the empress conferred by the past the Emperor of Tang was generally a woman from a big family, which could play a role in stabilizing the situation of the court, but Su Yueyun was just a daughter of a local family. Logically speaking, conferring the title of concubine was already vast and mighty. As for the empress, it was simply impossible. However, the new Emperor Li Xing insisted on conferring Su Yueyun as the empress and refused to budge an inch. Under such circumstances, no matter how dissatisfied the civil and military officials of the court were, they could only give in. After all, Li Xing was the emperor, the master of the Empire of Tang. At most, the ministers could only persuade him, but if the emperor didn't listen, there was nothing they could do. And in this year, the new Emperor Li Xing has also basically adapted to the current life, and has made enough progress in handling government affairs. When Su Qin occasionally scanned the entire palace with his divine sense, he saw that the new Emperor Li Xing often dealt with state affairs until midnight, and his travel was extremely simple. Generally, when a new emperor ascends the throne, he will definitely be extravagant and luxurious, but Li Xing didn't. Everything was still the same as during the reign of the Emperor of Tang, and there were almost no changes. Su Qin was quite satisfied with this. If Li Xing was a wise emperor, the Empire of Tang wouldn't have so many troubles, and he could sign in and cultivate in the palace with peace of mind. Just as Su Qin was thinking, his heart suddenly moved. He saw the new Emperor Li Xing walking towards the East Palace with a few accompanying eunuchs. Are they looking for me? Su Qin raised his eyebrows. Since the new Emperor Li Xing and Su Yueyun moved out of the East Palace, the huge East Palace had become much quieter. Except for Su Qin, there were only a few eunuchs and palace maids left. The new Emperor Li Xing came here specifically to see Su Qin. The new Emperor Li Xing came to the right spring square. Your Majesty, do you want this old servant to go in and announce the decree? A eunuch next to him bowed and asked. No need. The new Emperor Li Xing shook his head, took a few steps, and waved his hand towards the right spring square. Third brother. Su Qin walked out unhurriedly and looked at the new Emperor Li Xing. Okay, all of you can leave. I want to stay with the third brother for a while. The new Emperor Li Xing glanced at the eunuchs. The eunuchs respectfully said, then turned and left. Third brother, I've been bored to death this year. The new Emperor Li Xing complained to Su Qin. That old man, the Minister of Rights, has been staring at me all day, and the Minister of Revenue has been asking me for money all day long. How can I have so much money? Su Qin smiled and didn't say anything. In the past year, the new Emperor Li Xing would talk to Su Qin every once in a while and confide in him about some of his troubles. The two of them chatted for a while as they strolled along the shady path at the side. As a gentle breeze brushed past his face, the new Emperor Li Xing's expression was clearly much better. He was the emperor of the Empire of Tang and had the greatest power in the world. But in fact, while an emperor had the greatest power, he also had to bear the heaviest pressure. Chapter 118. As Su Qin listened to the complaints of the new Emperor Li Xing, he felt more and more that his choice was correct. No matter where it was, whether it was the Shaolin Temple or the Imperial Palace, the more you get, the more you have to give. Now, Su Qin seemed to have no power in the Imperial Palace, but in fact he was the most leisurely one. Every day he would sign in, cultivate, wander around, and continue to become stronger. Wouldn't that be wonderful? In the imperial court, the courtiers respect and fear me, but in the past year, factional disputes have gradually appeared. When the new Emperor Li Xing talked about this topic, his tone gradually became heavier. In fact, no matter which dynasty, factional disputes were inevitable. However, before Li Xing ascended the throne, the Emperor of Tang had already cleaned up the imperial court and infinitely weakened the factional disputes. But after a year, especially after the imperial examination, the factional disputes had begun to appear again. This made the new Emperor Li Xing very tired. He allowed the courtiers to fight among themselves, but the premise of all this was to put the interests of the Empire of Tang first. But once a faction was formed, for some courtiers, the interests of their own faction might be greater than the interests of the Empire of Tang. Factional disputes? Su Qin thought for a while and asked casually, "Why are there factional disputes?" "It's very complicated to explain." The new Emperor Li Sheng thought for a while and stopped talking. The talented officials of the Empire of Tang are basically produced through the Imperial Examination. And the Imperial Examination is handled by the Chief Examiner, which leads to the examinees of the Imperial Examination held by this Chief Examiner are all under his wing. In this way, when this group of examinees enters the Imperial Court, they will naturally stand by this Chief Examiner's side and form their own faction to exclude outsiders. The new Emperor Li Sheng explained the main source of the factional disputes in a few words. In fact, the Emperor of Tang knew about this. But knowing was one thing, he couldn't solve it. He couldn't possibly cancel the Imperial Examinations, right? Or, every once in a while, clean up the Imperial Court like the Emperor of Tang did? Third brother, what do you think of this? Emperor Li Sheng rubbed his forehead and looked at Su Qin. My opinion? Su Qin pondered for a moment. Since the reason for the conflict between the factions is the head examiner, why don't we just change the head examiner? Su Qin said casually. Change the chief examiner? The new Emperor Li Sheng's eyes lit up, but they dimmed in an instant. He shook his head and said, the Imperial Examination involves all the candidates in the world and concerns the inheritance of the Empire of Tang. The chief examiner can only be chosen from the officials in the Imperial Court. Because only the officials standing in the Imperial Court have enough influence to convince the examinees. But this way, no matter who it is, they will push that batch of examinees under their wing and form a faction. Emperor Li Sheng said bitterly. You misunderstood what I meant. Su Qin shook his head and continued, I don't want to change the chief examiner to another official. Not another official? Emperor Li Sheng was slightly stunned and did not understand. You can be the chief examiner. Su Qin looked at Emperor Li Sheng and said casually, I'll be the chief examiner. I'll be the chief examiner. I'll be the chief examiner. The more Emperor Li Sheng thought about it, the brighter his eyes became. The main source of the conflict between the factions was that the examinees of that year would be placed under a certain chief examiner. In the long run, there would be many factions in the Imperial Court, and factions would naturally form. But if the Emperor of Tang was the chief examiner, all the examinees would be placed under the Emperor of Tang's wing. In this way, there would only be one faction in the Imperial Court. The conflict between factions meant that there were many factions fighting with each other. But if there was only one faction, what was the point of fighting? Everyone was on the same side. Why would they fight? Under such circumstances, the conflict between factions would naturally disappear. Third brother. You've really reminded me. Emperor Li Sheng's face was filled with joy. He hurriedly said, I'll go back first. I'll come find you tomorrow. Emperor Li Sheng anxiously returned to the Palace of Immortals. Su Qin looked at Emperor Li Sheng's back as he left. His smile gradually faded. It's about time. Su Qin looked at the sky and returned to the right spring square. At this moment, in addition to the 5 elements reversal formation, Su Qin had also set up several other formations in the right spring square. The main purpose of these formations was to suppress the aura and prevent it from leaking out. This way, the commotion caused by Su Qin's breakthrough would not affect the outside world. This would save Su Qin the trouble of running outside every time he broke through. Begin. Su Qin sat down cross-legged and focused. Swoosh. Hundreds of bottles of elixirs appeared. Apart from that, there were more than 100 drops of Khanate spirit liquid. These were the Khanate spirit liquid that Su Qin had been accumulating over the past year. His goal was to break through today. The Khanate spirit liquid was gentle and had obvious effects. Whether it was during normal cultivation or during critical moments, it was extremely effective. There's also this. In front of Su Qin, a pale golden Bodhi heart with mysterious lines faintly appearing on its surface appeared again. It was the Millennium Bodhi heart. During this period of time, Su Qin had been cultivating and comprehending heaven and earth. Therefore, he had deliberately placed the Millennium Bodhi heart back into the system space. Now that he was breaking through, he naturally needed the Millennium Bodhi heart to protect his mind in order to be foolproof. Although Su Qin did not think that he would need the Millennium Bodhi heart given his current preparations, it was better than nothing. In the next moment, Su Qin slowly closed his eyes. Swoosh. Inhale. As Su Qin breathed, the more than 100 drops of connate spirit liquid in front of him immediately turned into flowing water and flowed into Su Qin's mouth. At the same time, the other elixirs were also swallowed by Su Qin. Suddenly, the true essence in Su Qin's body continued to surge, and the aura he exuded became more and more terrifying. If it were not for the heaven and earth array, the entire Chang'an city would have been shaken. After swallowing more than 100 drops of connate spirit liquid and hundreds of bottles of elixirs, Su Qin's true essence began to surge crazily. Even though the connate spirit liquid was gentle, it was based on the premise that it was taken drop by drop. If Su Qin's body had not gone through 4 transformations and even developed a trace of immortal metal attribute, he would have exploded and died. Rumble. Su Qin's qi and blood surged like a millstone of heaven and earth slowly rotating. Buzz! At this moment, Su Qin's true essence that was constantly circulating seemed to have undergone a transformation and began to transform in a strange direction. The transformed true essence was more powerful and profound, as if it could overwhelm heaven and earth. Time passed slowly. Just as all the true essence in Su Qin's body had transformed into that more powerful and profound true essence. Su Qin's aura that had been rising suddenly began to shrink, as if it had turned into a black hole and completely sank. In the next moment, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes. Is this the Arhat state of the 4-level heaven? Su Qin carefully felt the changes in his body and a smile appeared on his face. Chapter 119. In the right spring square. Su Qin was overjoyed. At this moment, the true essence flowing in his body was several times more than before the breakthrough, and the original true essence had transformed into another type of true essence. This true essence was more powerful and profound, as if it could overwhelm heaven and earth. Not bad, not bad. Su Qin was extremely satisfied. When he broke through from Arhat's first heaven to Arhat's third heaven, it only increased his true essence by several times. Now that he had just stepped into the 4th heaven, it had already exceeded this increase. What was even more frightening was that after this breakthrough, Su Qin's true essence had undergone some kind of qualitative change, completely transforming into another type of true essence. Compared to the increase in quantity, Su Qin was more looking forward to the quality improvement. Let's not worry about the true essence for now. Let's see how much my control of heaven and earth's power has improved after stepping into the 4th heaven. Su Qin's mind slowly integrated into the surrounding heaven and earth. Compared to the 9 grades of the martial Tao, the biggest difference between Venerable Arhat and Legends was their control of heaven and earth's power. Among the 9 grades of the martial Tao, even a grade 1 great perfection martial artist could only slightly draw on heaven and earth's power. But if one became Venerable Arhat or Legend, they could completely control heaven and earth's power, and their every move would be like heaven and earth, with vast power. This was also the reason why Venerable Arhat and Legends could ignore the sea of people tactic. Unless facing a powerhouse of the same level, Venerable Arhat and Legends had nothing to worry about. Su Qin's mind continued to spread until it reached a radius of 20 miles with him as the center. My control of heaven and earth's power has reached 20 miles. Su Qin's face was full of joy. When he was at the 1st heaven Arhat, he could control heaven and earth's power within a radius of a few miles, and when he reached the 3rd heaven great perfection, his control of heaven and earth's power increased to 10 miles. Then, no matter how Su Qin cultivated, his control of heaven and earth's power was firmly fixed at 10 miles, as if the heaven and earth's power within a radius of 10 miles was the limit of 3rd heaven Arhat. The heaven and earth's power within a radius of 20 miles can increase my strength by more than 10 times. The joy on Su Qin's face grew stronger and stronger. The difference between a radius of 10 miles and a radius of 20 miles seemed to be only 1 time, but in reality, it was a world of difference. Whether it was the vastness of the power of heaven and earth or the flexibility of the power of heaven and earth, the two were on completely different levels. No wonder it said that there will be a qualitative change when a third heavenly layer breaks through to the fourth heavenly layer. From the looks of it now, it's not just a qualitative change, Su Qin sighed in his heart. Arhat at the fourth celestial layer is already so powerful, then what about the seventh celestial layer? Or even the 9 heavens? Could it really destroy the heavens and earth? Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. Su Qin didn't know if a 9th heavenly layer legend had ever been born on this continent, but for a Buddhist holy land like the Shaolin Temple, which had been passed down for thousands of years, the strongest person that had appeared since its opening was only a 6th heavenly layer Arhat. And according to Su Qin's understanding from the ancient books in the Shaolin Temple, the reason why this venerable Arhat was able to cultivate to the 6th heavenly layer was entirely because he found a great opportunity in the depths of the endless ocean. The endless ocean. Su Qin raised his head slightly and looked beyond the continent. As early as the animal skin on the Devil Lord's body, Su Qin knew that there was probably another world in the depths of the endless ocean. The depths of the endless ocean, although there are great opportunities, there are also great risks. More than 2,000 years ago in the Shaolin Temple, a venerable Arhat went to the endless ocean and never came back. Now, as long as I continue to sign in, I can continue to become stronger. There's no need to go to the endless ocean. Su Qin shook his head slightly. Other martial arts legends crossed the endless ocean because their own strength was difficult to improve, or because Shouyuan was facing the end of his life. They had no choice but to do so to win that glimmer of hope. But Su Qin was different. He, Shouyuan, had plenty of resources and could live for 970 years. Plus, he didn't lack cultivation resources. Why would he risk going to the endless ocean? It was like a crown prince of a certain country who was about to inherit the throne and rule the world, but he wanted to rise from nothing and abandon everything. Wasn't that a fool? Su Qin was a cautious person. Of course, he would choose the safest and most secure path. Now, I'll stabilize my realm first, Su Qin thought for a while and slowly closed his eyes again. The true essence of the past Amitabha Sutra kept circulating. Time passed slowly. The next day, Su Qin stabilized his realm slightly and officially came out of seclusion. Everything in the palace was as usual. Now that the new emperor was diligent in his work, the empire of Tang seemed to be thriving. However, the eastern palace had always been cold and cheerless. But Su Qin didn't care about that. He liked peace and quiet, and the current environment of the eastern palace was exactly what he wanted. Time really flies. Su Qin slowly paced back and forth, thinking leisurely. Unknowingly, he had been in this world for 30 years. Also unknowingly, he had become Arhat, fourth heaven. Next, Su Qin once again returned to his previous life. After becoming Arhat, fourth heaven, Su Qin didn't have any feelings of complacency, because he knew that there was always someone better than him. In the depths of the endless ocean. Just as Su Qin was checking in and cultivating every day. A year passed in the blink of an eye. In this year, the new Emperor Li Sheng abolished the chief examiner of the imperial examination system of the Empire of Tang. As the Emperor of Tang, he personally became the chief examiner. In the future, every batch of examinees would no longer be disciples of some minister, but disciples of the emperor. As expected, with the reality of this move, the factionalism in the imperial court eased a lot. The new Emperor Li Sheng knew that this move couldn't completely eradicate the factionalism, because as long as there were people in the imperial court, there would inevitably be factionalism. But it could slow down the factionalism to a great extent. And to be able to do this, the new Emperor Li Sheng was already satisfied. Late at night, all the civil and military officials hurried to the Taiji Palace. The new Emperor Li Sheng sat on the dragon throne with a gloomy expression. The officials in the imperial court also had solemn expressions, as if something big had happened. After a long time, the Minister of Revenue braced himself and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, where did this news come from? Is it true or false?" As soon as he said this, Emperor Li Sheng suddenly stood up and said in an extremely depressed voice, "Is it true or false?" Emperor Li Sheng took out a piece of paper and read it word by word. "On the night of the full moon, I will borrow the imperial palace. Brother Chueshue and I will discuss the Tao of the Sword. White Cloud City's City Lord Yi Guqing. After Emperor Li Xing finished speaking, he looked directly at the civil and military officials in the imperial court. This matter has already spread out, and the whole world knows about it. Tell me, what should I do? As soon as Emperor Li Xing's voice fell, the complexions of the officials in the imperial court suddenly changed. Although they are not martial artists, they know a thing or two about White Cloud City's City Lord Yi Guqing. In the current world, although peak grade 1 great grandmasters are extremely rare, there are some. And among the peak grade 1 great grandmasters, White Cloud City's City Lord Yi Guqing is definitely one of the most dazzling ones. Chapter 120. In the Taiji Palace, all the civil and military officials were silent. Although peak grade 1 great grandmasters have shaken the world, there are still differences between them. And the White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing is definitely one of the most powerful peak grade 1 great grandmasters. Because what Yi Guqing cultivates is Sword Dao. Sword Dao focuses on killing and is known as the sharpest. As a peak grade 1 great grandmaster, in terms of attack, Yi Guqing is probably close to grade 1 great perfection who has undergone third transformation. The officials never dreamed that the Empire of Tang would face Yi Guqing, the city lord of the White Cloud City. If Yi Guqing wants other things, even if it is 10,000 gold or the position of king, it is not impossible to negotiate. But if he wants to borrow the Emperor of Tang's palace, the Emperor of Tang's palace is the face of the Empire of Tang. If Yi Guqing is allowed to borrow it, then the Empire of Tang will become the laughingstock of the world in the future and will never be able to raise its head again. The Empire of Tang has been established for more than 500 years. When has it ever suffered such humiliation? Brother Chueshue? Is it Shimin Chueshue? Some officials muttered to themselves, and suddenly their complexion changed again. The rest of the officials obviously realized something, and their expressions were extremely ugly. The only person who can make the dignified White Cloud City Lord call him Brother Chueshue is probably Shimin Chueshue, who is also a peak grade 1 great grandmaster and is known to be close to God. What should we do? The officials felt cold in their hearts. If it was just Yi Guqing alone, with the current foundation of the Empire of Tang, they may be able to resist. But with Shimin Chueshue added, for a moment, all the officials trembled. Emperor Li Xing saw this scene and sighed softly. This is the biggest drawback facing the Empire of Tang today. There is no peak grade 1 great grandmaster. Since the death of the Emperor of Tang, the only peak grade 1 great grandmaster in the Emperor of Tang's palace, Eunuch Zhao, also passed away. In the past 2 years, Emperor Li Xing has been trying to cultivate a peak grade 1 great grandmaster, but unfortunately, he has not seen any hope. Even if the new Emperor Li Xing used all the resources of the Empire of Tang, the results were slow. Peak grade 1 great grandmaster involves a transformation of the body, unless there are a few rare treasures, such as the spirit concentration pill and so on. Moreover, even if it was a spirit concentrating pill, it would only be effective when one's spirit was nurtured to the extreme. Otherwise, he could only rely on himself. The influence of external factors was almost negligible. Although the new Emperor Li Xing had vaguely guessed that the existence who had killed Nanming Wu and Wang and Yin Jiobat with zither music back then might be a peerless expert. However, he hadn't seen the other party yet, so he wasn't sure if the other party would attack again. Perhaps this peerless expert just happened to pass by the Emperor of Tang's palace and then left? No matter what, the new Emperor Li Xing would not place his hopes on an uncertain factor. Because he was the Emperor of the Tang dynasty. Your Majesty, don't be impulsive. When the ministers saw the determination on Emperor Li Xing's face, they immediately knelt down and persuaded him bitterly. How could these ministers not know about Yi Guqing's provocation? But in the face of 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters, who are known as the best in terms of offense, the Empire of Tang simply can't afford such a huge change. Impulsive? This Yi Guqing stepped on my face, and you're telling me not to be impulsive? Emperor Li Xing kept pacing back and forth, his tone was low. Nowadays, the various countries seem to have stopped fighting, but the Empire of Tang occupies the vast and rich Central Plains and is being targeted by many countries. For example, when the Emperor of Tang died 2 years ago, the Ming Emperor sent King Weiyang to test the background of the Empire of Tang. Fortunately, whether it was King Weiyang or Yin Jiubat, they both died in the imperial city, which deterred the other countries and made them not dare to make any moves. It was for this reason that the world was calm for 2 years. However, if Yi Gucheng was allowed to borrow the Emperor of Tang's palace this time, it would be tantamount to exposing the weakness of the Empire of Tang in front of the world. At that time, the Empire of Tang will not only face a loss of face, but also a war launched by the other countries. Since your Majesty insists, we can only obey. The minister who had just spoken raised his head to look at Li Sheng, sighed deeply and bowed. Good. The new emperor, Li Sheng, stopped and looked down at the court. I will recall all the Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in the Empire of Tang back to the palace. In addition, I will mobilize the army near Chang'an City. The new emperor, Li Sheng, sat back down on the dragon throne and calmly gave out orders. In the Emperor of Tang's palace, there are 23 peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters, but it does not mean that there are only 23 Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in the Empire of Tang. There are also some Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in other places, or in the Tang Empire, there are also Grade 1 Great Grandmasters. Although the Grade 1 Great Grandmasters do not listen to the Emperor of Tang's orders, the Emperor of Tang can pay a price to ask them to act. As for the army near Chang'an City, it is Emperor Li Sheng's biggest deterrent. Even if a peak Grade 1 Great Grandmaster is trapped under the siege of an army of hundreds of thousands, there is a risk of death. At the same time, inside the East Palace, Su Qin walked slowly on the shaded path. Since entering the 4th heavenly layer a year ago, Su Qin's cultivation speed has slowed down again. Sigh. Sure enough, there is no shortcut in martial Dao cultivation, it can only be done step by step. Su Qin sighed softly, his face full of emotion. Even with the continuous consumption of innate spirit liquid, 9 revolutions whirling pill and glazed golden core, his progress was still so slow. One can imagine how difficult it is to cultivate above the 4th heavenly layer. Of course, the slow, in Su Qin's mouth, is relative to the speed before the breakthrough. If compared with other arhats and legends, it would definitely be many times faster. However, the palace has not been peaceful recently. Su Qin seemed to have thought of something and released a huge amount of divine sense, sweeping the entire palace. Su Qin usually does not always cover the palace with his divine sense, but every once in a while. Huh? Night of the full moon? Borrowing the palace? White Cloud City Lord Yi Gucheng? Shimen Chueshue? Su Qin raised his eyebrows, and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. In the sweep of his divine sense just now, Su Qin heard these words from more than one palace maid and eunuch. The people in the palace were in a panic, and although many palace maids and eunuchs did not dare to talk about it openly, they were still talking carefully in secret. Interesting. Using the palace as a battlefield to seek a breakthrough? Su Qin shook his head slightly, his face full of confusion. If they really dare to come, just slap them to death. Su Qin walked unhurriedly, thinking casually in his heart. In any case, the Emperor of Tang is now his brother-in-law, and Su Qin also regards the entire palace as his own back garden. How can he let 2 flies fly in front of him? Besides, in the eyes of the current Su Qin, not to mention 2 peak Grade 1 Sword Dao Great Grandmasters, even if there are 20 or 200 of them, they are nothing at all. Chapter 121. Everyone in the palace was panicking, but Su Qin leisurely came to the crop altar. Logically speaking, the crop altar was a place where the Empire of Tang offered sacrifices to heaven and earth. Ordinary people were forbidden from approaching, but Su Qin was the brother-in-law of the Emperor of Tang. How could the forbidden army guarding the crop altar dare to stop him? It just so happens that today's sign-in opportunity has been refreshed. Let's sign in while I'm at it. Su Qin stood in front of the crop altar with anticipation in his heart. After so many sign-in experiences, Su Qin discovered that the crop altar in the palace should be equivalent to the Bodhi court in the Shaolin Temple. It was specially designed for Sign In to obtain treasures that could improve one's strength. For example, innate spirit liquid, system, Sign In. Su Qin said in his heart. Congratulations to the host for Sign In successfully. Received Blood Bodhi, X3. A cold, mechanical voice sounded in Su Qin's ears. Blood Bodhi? Su Qin's mind merged into the system space and soon found 3 Blood Bodhi that had just appeared in a corner. Blood Bodhi was a strange fruit that was as red as blood. According to the system's introduction, Blood Bodhi had the effect of increasing one's strength and healing serious injuries. Can this thing be eaten? Su Qin returned to the right spring square, sat cross-legged, and took out one of the Blood Bodhi from the system space. Su Qin carefully looked at the Blood Bodhi and found that this strange fruit was crystal clear all over. The flesh of the fruit seemed to be flowing with blood. When Su Qin held it in his hand, he could even feel a boiling heat like magma and hot blood. It's not blood. Su Qin shook his head slightly. Gulp. The next moment, Su Qin directly swallowed the Blood Bodhi in front of him. Well, it's sour and sweet. The taste is not bad, much better than those pills. Su Qin chewed the Blood Bodhi a few times and felt as if he had swallowed a spirit fruit, leaving a lingering fragrance in his mouth. In the end, the juice of the Blood Bodhi turned into wisps of heat and rushed towards Su Qin's limbs and bones. Not bad, not bad. It's about the same as primordial spirit liquid. Su Qin carefully sensed and judged in his heart. The help that 1 Blood Bodhi provided to Su Qin was equivalent to a drop of connate spirit liquid. Apart from that, the biggest difference between the Blood Bodhi and the connate spiritual liquid was that it was more refreshing. As for the Blood Bodhi's other use, it could heal serious injuries. Su Qin hadn't sensed it yet because Su Qin's body had gone through 4 transformations. Coupled with the fact that he had entered the 4th heaven of Arhat, his body was always in peak condition. Even if he suffered any injuries, he could quickly recover. There was no need for the Blood Bodhi. I didn't expect there to be such a surprise this time. Looks like I can sign in at the crop altar a few more times in the future. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. After spending almost a year signing in the entire palace, Su Qin found a total of more than a dozen places where he could repeatedly sign in. The crop altar was one of them. While Su Qin was signing in silently in the imperial palace, Xianxia city has long been a chaotic place. Countless martial artists from all over the world gathered here, wanting to witness the battle between 2 peak grade 1 sword Dao great grandmasters. One must know that the battle between the White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing and Shimin Chuexue in the Emperor of Tang's palace has long been famous. Usually, even a battle between grade 1 great grandmasters is very rare, let alone a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. Now that there was such an opportunity, it naturally attracted many martial artists. In an inn in Xianxia city, many martial artists from all over the world were eating and chatting. Who do you think is stronger between the White Cloud City Lord and Shimin Chuexue? A thin man asked. It's hard to say. Another old man shook his head slightly and said, whether it is the White Cloud City Lord or Shimin Chuexue, they are both peak grade 1 great grandmasters. The outcome of the battle between the two depends on who is faster. When these words came out, the others nodded slightly. If it were the other 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters, it would take hundreds of moves or even more to determine the winner. Then Yi Guqing and Shimin Chuexue may only need a few moves. Because swordsmen are indomitable and are good at attacking. With one sword, life and death are basically determined. If you can block it, you will live. If you can't block it, you will die. It is rumored that 2 years ago, 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters fell outside the Emperor of Tang's palace. Yi Guqing and Shimin Chuexue are fighting again. Will the Empire of Tang reap the benefits? The thin man who spoke at the beginning suddenly thought of something and lowered his voice and continued to ask. When the old man heard this, he smiled and continued, You don't think that there is a legend in the Emperor of Tang's palace, do you? I did think so at the time. The thin man nodded and said, It should be known that defeating a peak grade 1 great grandmaster and killing a peak grade 1 great grandmaster are 2 completely different concepts. A peak grade 1 great grandmaster is not a fool. If they can't win, they will naturally escape. What's more, 2 Grade 1 Great Grandmasters fell outside the Emperor of Tang's palace at that time. You think too much. The old man shook his head and said, "What kind of existence is a legend? If the Empire of Tang has a legend, I'm afraid it would have already been publicized. How could there be no movement until now?" When the old man said this, the other martial artists around were thoughtful. Yes. If there is a legend standing behind the Empire of Tang, then the Empire of Tang should have begun to unify the countries. Then how do you explain the 2 peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters who fell outside the imperial city? The thin man seemed to be unable to figure this out and still asked. It's very simple. The old man calmly said, "Since the Emperor of Tang ascended the throne 2 years ago, eunuch Zhao has never appeared in the imperial palace. Now, many people are guessing that it was eunuch Zhao who stopped King Weiyang and Yin Jiubat at that time. In the end, both of them died together. There may be other possibilities. But in any case, with the means of Yi Guqing and Shimin Chueshue, as long as there is no old monster like a legend in the Emperor of Tang's palace, there is nothing to fear." The old man slowly said. "So that's how it is." The thin man suddenly understood. The Emperor of Tang's palace. Emperor Li Xing was sitting on the dragon throne. "Your Majesty, many martial artists have come to Chang and city. Do you want me to order them to be driven out?" Minister of War bowed and asked. "No need." Emperor Li Xing thought for a while and shook his head. The Empire of Tang's current energy should be focused on the night of the full moon. As for the martial artists gathered in Chang and city at this moment, they are not worth mentioning at all. If the Empire of Tang can block Yi Guqing and Shimin Chueshue, these martial artists will naturally not dare to act recklessly. If the Empire of Tang can't block them, it doesn't make sense to drive those martial artists away. "How is the mobilization of the army?" Emperor Li Xing asked in a deep voice. "Reporting back to your Majesty, they are all waiting outside Chang and city. They are only waiting for your Majesty's order to enter the city." Minister of War respectfully said. "That's good." Emperor Li Xing nodded slightly, his thoughts drifting. No one knows what he is thinking. Chapter 122. Time passed slowly. Soon it was the night of the full moon. Emperor Li Xing stood on the white jade square. Beside him, there were many red-clothed eunuchs guarding to prevent any accidents. "Your Majesty, this place is too dangerous. We can escort your Majesty out of the city quietly. In this way, even if Yi Guqing and Shimin Chueshue really come, they will not threaten your Majesty." Eunuch Lu looked at the sky and whispered. "No need." Emperor Li Xing shook his head. "The Son of Heaven guards the country. The king dies for the country. If he can't even guard the imperial palace, then there is no point in being the emperor. Since your Majesty has decided so, your Majesty must be safe and sound before this old servant dies." Eunuch Lu said in a deep voice. After a few hours, the sky gradually darkened. A bright moon hung in the sky, releasing bright moonlight. At this moment, the Forbidden Army commander was shocked and looked at a certain place. He saw a man in white robes standing on top of a palace like an immortal. Just looking at him from a distance, the Forbidden Army commander felt a slight sting in his eyes, as if he was looking at a sharp sword that can cut through everything. White Cloud City Lord, Yi Guqing. The Forbidden Army commander looked extremely shocked. He did not expect that Yi Guqing would be so strong. Just by his aura, it was enough to make him, a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster, unable to look directly at him. "Don't rush to make a move now. Wait for both of them to arrive, then make a move." Emperor Li Xing glanced at the Grade 1 Great Grandmaster beside him and said slowly. The Forbidden Army commander said in a low voice. After a while, Shimin Chueshue also appeared above a palace, facing Yi Guqing from a distance. "You're late." Yi Guqing looked at Shimin Chueshue and said faintly. At their level, whether it is about themselves or the outside world, they have already grasped it to the extreme. "I'm late," Shimin Chueshue admitted frankly. 2 years ago, 2 peak Grade 1 fell here. At that time, I thought that a Grade 1 great perfection had appeared here. Xianxia's eyes turned slightly and scanned the Emperor of Tang's palace. But from the looks of it now, there isn't. Xianxia shook his head slightly. He had been obsessed with the way of the sword since he was young. He had a heart of the sword and could sense any danger that might exist nearby. It was precisely because of his sword heart that he had helped him through countless calamities. However, at this moment, when Xianxia stood in the imperial palace, his heart of the sword was as calm as ever, without any warning. If there really was a grade 1 great perfection in the imperial palace, then his sword heart should have felt something by now. Although grade 1 great perfection is powerful, as long as it has not transcended the scope of the martial Tao, it cannot escape the perception of the sword heart. Yes. There is no grade 1 great perfection here. White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing lowered his head and glanced at the ground. He said calmly, "Looks like before we spar with the sword, we'll have to get rid of some ants." With Yi Guqing's eyesight, he naturally discovered many grade 1 great grandmasters lying in ambush in the imperial palace. Indeed. I think so too. Xianxia nodded. Although he is obsessed with the sword and has nothing else in his heart except for the sword, he is not a fool. It is impossible for him to give others a chance to injure both sides. This time, he and Yi Guqing were discussing the way of the sword. In the end, no matter who survives, they will be seriously injured. At this time, if he was surrounded by a group of grade 1 great grandmasters, his life would be in danger. In that case, make your move. The long sword behind Yi Guqing suddenly let out a sword cry, and then a terrifying sword light gathered and slashed in the direction of the white jade square. Not good. The Forbidden Army commander found that something was wrong and immediately took Emperor Li Sheng to retreat in a certain direction. The rest of the grade 1 great grandmasters did the same. Under the sword light of Yi Guqing, they did not have any thoughts of resisting. The gap is too big. Emperor Li Sheng also recovered at this moment. In his eyes, Yi Guqing, the White Cloud City Lord standing above the palace, and the other grade 1 great grandmasters were on two completely different levels. Emperor Li Sheng has not seen a peak grade 1 great grandmaster before. Before the Emperor of Tang died, he had seen Eunuch Zhao's methods. But compared with Eunuch Zhao, the White Cloud City Lord in front of him seems to be much more terrifying. Mobilize the army into the city. Also, all grade 1 great grandmasters start setting up the formation. Emperor Li Sheng took a deep breath and issued several orders in a row. Whether it is Yi Guqing or Xianxia, neither of them has taken the step to become a legend. Since that is the case, they may be exhausted to death by the sea of people. This is also Emperor Li Sheng's last confidence. And at this time, White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing frowned slightly, as if he was frowning at the fact that he had to deal with the grade 1 great grandmasters below. Brother Yi, the Emperor of Tang's palace still has a lot of heritage. Xianxia's voice just fell. Dozens of grade 1 great grandmasters stood in a certain position, constantly changing, forming a huge net, trying to trap Yi Guqing and Xianxia. This was also Emperor Li Sheng's original plan. He does not expect the dozens of grade 1 great grandmasters to be able to contend against Yi Guqing and Xianxia. He only wants to trap the two for a while, wait for the army to enter the city, and then use the sea of people to exhaust the other party. Heritage. White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing smiled contemptuously and slowly pulled out the long sword behind him. Under my sword, everything will be destroyed. The next moment, Wang! A sword light 10 times more terrifying than before condensed, and a terrifying sword intent enveloped the surroundings. At the same time, East Palace Right Spring Square. Su Qin slowly opened his eyes. After a year of cultivation, I finally made some progress. A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. Su Qin seemed to feel something, and raised his head slightly, looking in the direction of the white jade square. They really dare to come? Su Qin shook his head. He was immersed in cultivation just now and neglected his perception of the outside world for a while. Since they are here, then stay. Su Qin didn't move. He just raised his right hand and casually released a wisp of sword light towards the white jade square. White jade square. As White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing pulled out the long sword behind him, the entire White Jade Square was filled with extremely fierce sword qi. The Grade 1 Great Grandmasters who had just arranged the Great Array felt their scalps explode, and they could not continue to follow the array. It's over. Emperor Li Xing's heart thumped. The White Cloud City Lord's sword light enveloped the entire White Jade Square, and naturally included him. Emperor Li Xing's original plan was to use dozens of Grade 1 Great Grandmasters to delay Yi Guqing and Shimin Shueishue with the help of the array, and then let the Patriarch army exhaust the other party. But he did not expect that before the army entered the city, they would already be unable to hold on. Kill for me. White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing slowly waved his long sword and was about to cut down. Suddenly, it was at this moment, the White Cloud City Lord seemed to feel something, and raised his head and looked in a certain direction in the depths of the Imperial Palace. However, with this glance, the White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing saw an unforgettable scene. He saw an invisible sword light coming out of nowhere and quickly slashing towards him. The moment he saw this sword light, the White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing felt that the heavens and earth immediately began to turn illusory and became unreal. The same was true for his body, his internal strength, and his divine sense. All that was left was a faint and fearful thought as he faced this extremely pure sword light all by himself. Chapter 123. Chang'an City. Imperial Palace. On the White Jade Square. Swish. Yi Guqing only saw the sword light coming from a certain position in the Imperial Palace, and he felt that his line of sight was completely occupied by it. Everything became illusory, as if he was in an unreal dream. Cracks appeared on the long sword in Yi Guqing's hand, which continued to spread and spread to the entire sword in an instant. Brother Yiyu? Not far away, Shimin Shueishue's pupils shrank, and he subconsciously looked in the direction of Yi Guqing's gaze. That is, Shimin Shueishue did not react. The next moment, then, the sword light swept past. Wang. Yi Guqing and Shimin Shueishue's thoughts began to fall, and they fell into boundless darkness. And at this moment, the Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in the White Jade Square looked on helplessly as the two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters fell from the sky and landed on the White Jade Square. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Many Grade 1 Great Grandmasters looked at each other. They were at a loss. They had thought of all possibilities just now, and even thought that they would fall under Yi Guqing's sword. However, no one had expected this to happen even in their wildest dreams. Your Majesty, what should we do now? A deputy commander of the Forbidden Army struggled out of shock and looked at Emperor Li Xing and couldn't help but ask. Eunuch Lu, go and take a look. Emperor Li Xing thought for a moment and immediately said, As you wish. Eunuch Lu bowed slightly and began to slowly walk towards the place where Yi Guqing and Shimin Shueishue fell. The other Grade 1 Great Grandmasters surrounded them. In this way, even if Yi Guqing and Shimin Shueishue played tricks, they could quickly react and give a thunderous blow in the shortest time. After a while, Eunuch Lu quickly rushed back and whispered to Emperor Li Xing, Your Majesty, they are dead. Dead? Emperor Li Xing was silent. The other Grade 1 Great Grandmasters were also in disbelief. Two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters of the Sword Dao died just like that? Your Majesty, perhaps it's the senior who took action 2 years ago? At this moment, the commander of the Forbidden Army suddenly thought of something and said in a low voice. As soon as he said this, Emperor Li Xing's thoughts raced. 2 years ago, Prince Chen colluded with the Southern Ming Empire and fought with King Weiyang and Yin Jiobat until two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters arrived outside the Imperial City. At that time, the new Emperor Li Xing was already in despair. No one in the entire Imperial Palace could stop the two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters. However, at that moment, the sound of a zither rang out. After the sound of the zither, the song came to an end. The new Emperor Li Xing vaguely sensed that there was a peerless master in the Imperial Palace, but he had never seen him before, so he could not be sure. We understand. Emperor Li Xing looked pensive. Although he did not know why that peerless expert had been staying in the palace, Since the other party had saved the Empire of Tang 3 or 4 times, it was obvious that the other party had a lot of goodwill towards the Empire of Tang. Could it be a living ancestor? Emperor Li Xing guessed in his heart. The Empire of Tang has been established for more than 500 years, and the great ancestor is a legend. It is not impossible for there to be an ancestor hiding in the imperial palace. Okay. You all can leave. Emperor Li Xing pondered for a moment and ordered. As you wish. The Grade 1 great grandmasters looked at each other, unable to hide the shock in their hearts, and retreated one after another. They originally thought that today would be a hard battle, and that many Grade 1 great grandmasters would fall, but they did not expect things to develop so quickly. After the imperial palace gradually calmed down, the martial artists who came to Chang and City early were suddenly puzzled. Although they came to Chang and City, they could not get close to the imperial palace. They could only feel the aura fluctuations coming from the imperial palace from a distance. The battle between two peak Grade 1 great grandmasters, even if it's just a casual aura, is enough to spread throughout the entire Chang and City. These martial artists did not dare to ask to watch the battle between two peak Grade 1 great grandmasters face to face. First, because entering Chang and City is already their limit. If they want to get close to the imperial palace, are the Grade 1 great grandmasters of the Empire of Tang just decorations? Second, even if the Empire of Tang allowed them to enter the imperial palace to watch the battle, no one would dare to do so. The battle between peak Grade 1 great grandmasters is so fierce that even a casual aftershock is enough to kill most martial artists. These martial artists came to watch, but no one is willing to entrust their life and death in the hands of others. However, even if they can't watch the battle between two peak Grade 1 great grandmasters, just feeling their aura from a distance is enough to benefit them endlessly. However, what made it difficult for many martial artists to understand was that the aura coming from the imperial palace only lasted for a moment before it completely disappeared. What's going on? Yes, are Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chuexue going to fight? Could it be that they are lying to us? No, what kind of status do Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chuexue have? Since they are going to fight in the imperial palace of the Emperor of Tang, it is impossible for them not to do it. Many martial artists were discussing, their tone puzzled. At this moment, an old man with white hair and beard stood up. Maybe Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chuexue have already arrived. The old man with white hair and beard is a martial artist in the upper realm. As soon as he spoke, the surrounding martial artists quieted down. What do you mean? A martial artist couldn't help but ask. The old man with white hair and beard was silent for a long time before he said a sentence. They are here, but whether they can fight or not is another matter. When these words came out, all the martial artists were shocked. At this moment, they all understood what the old man meant. Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chuexue may have been suppressed by someone in the imperial palace of the Emperor of Tang the moment they appeared, and they did not fight at all. There is a great terror in the imperial palace of the Emperor of Tang. The old man with white hair and beard finally said slowly. Many martial artists looked at each other, inexplicably shocked. Imperial Palace. Right Spring Square. After Su Qin casually slashed out the sword light, he no longer cared about what happened in the Imperial Palace. With the sword light he just slashed out, not to mention that Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chuexue were only peak Grade 1 who had transformed twice, even a Grade 1 great perfection would not be able to block it. After a year of hard work, I finally took a little step forward. Su Qin sat cross-legged, feeling the changes in his aura. Since Su Qin entered the 4th heavenly layer a year ago, even if he took a lot of innate spirit liquid, blood bodhi, glazed golden core, and other treasures, his strength was still very slow. But just now, he had a breakthrough. If the 4th heavenly layer Arhat realm is divided into 3 levels, then Su Qin has entered the 2nd level at this moment. Not bad, not bad. Su Qin nodded slightly, quite satisfied. Immediately afterward, Su Qin slowly got up and walked out of the Right Spring Square. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation, audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.